Hi, everybody. Welcome to Lunch and Learn. I'm very excited to be here with you all today. Thank you to the United Synagogue for putting on the series and for hosting me to share some ideas about the Parasha, or in our case, the Parashiyot. We have two Parashiyot this week, Matot-Masei. And I want to discuss a section of the Parasha today that may seem a little bit strange. It's an idea that Torah talks about in a number of places, that you have the Arei Miklat, the cities of refuge. And it's a section which is quite unfamiliar to a lot of us, and not something which is practically applicable nowadays. And as I said, it seems a little bit strange, it seems a little bit foreign, but if we look at it and we plumb the depths of this parasha and see what's really behind it, I think there are a lot of practical messages that we can take out of it, certainly for our lives today. Like every section of the Torah, it's eternal, and it has messages to teach us and things that we can take home. So I want to share two ideas, and maybe three if we have time as well, about the Arei Miklat, these cities of refuge. And first of all, just by way of background in terms of what are the Arei Miklat, what are these cities of refuge, what were they for, what are they all about? So the Torah tells us that if you had a case of somebody who killed, it's very interesting that the Torah calls him a rotzeach, calls him a murderer. But we're not talking about premeditated, we're not talking about intentional murder, we're talking about if something happened which was shogeg. It was accidental. A person came along. One of the examples we have is if he was chopping down a tree and the axe slipped from his hand and fatally injured somebody else. What would be the status of that person? And the Torah comes up with this, tells us about this idea of this city of refuge, that the person would have to run away. He would have to go and live in exile in one of these cities. If he didn't get to one of these cities, then the Goel Adam, a relative of the person who had been killed, had it within his rights to go and kill him, avenge his blood, so to speak. But the Torah gives him the punishment, the Torah gives him a way out in order to save his life, but the punishment he has to go through is that he has to now go uproot everything, move himself, go and stay in one of these 6 cities of refuge. If we have a look at, we can just put the source sheet up on screen, we'll see some of the psukim that talk about it. And this comes from our parasha of the second of this week's parasha, Parashat Masei. And the Torah tells us, "Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe lemor," that Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, "Daber al bnei Israel," speak to the children of Israel, and you'll tell them that they are now currently on the east side of the Jordan River. Very, very soon they're going to cross over into Eretz Canaan, into the land of Israel. And he tells them over here, Pasuk Yud Aleph, "Vikritem lachem alim alei miklat tiyana lachem." So if there'll be a situation of maybe we translate today as manslaughter, person who's killed unintentionally can flee to one of these cities. And as we go on, the Torah details exactly how many of these cities were and where they were. And I want to share two ideas in terms of where these cities were that can teach us a very deep lesson. Of Yam Pasuk Yud Gimel, you see the Torah tells us, Ve'alim asher titenu. So these cities, how many of them would there be? There will be all in all 6 cities of refuge. And the Torah tells us where. It says that 3 of the cities will be beyond the Jordan, will be where you are now on the east side of the Jordan. And 3 of the cities will be on the other side, in Eretz Canaan, in the land of Israel. And these will be the Arei Miklat. What's very interesting is that all these 6 cities come together. The Torah tells us twice. You see over here, Pasuk Yud Gimel tells us there'll be 6 cities all in all. In the next Pasuk, it tells us 3 on one side and 3 on the other side. Now, it's obvious, if the Torah tells us 3 and 3, it's obvious that comes to 6. But why did it need to stress it twice? Why did it tell us that number? And Rashi over here points out to us, he says, Shesh alei miklat magid, it teaches, she'afal pi shevdil Moshe b'chayav, shalosh alim be'ever yaden. Moshe Rabbeinu, we'll speak a little bit more now about this, but Moshe Rabbeinu in his life set aside 3 of these cities, the 3 that were on the east side of the Jordan. Moshe Rabbeinu never had the zchut to travel across and to lead the Bnei Israel into the land of Israel itself. He was only in Transjordan, but he set aside those 3 cities. Nonetheless, tells us Rashi, based on the Gemara, Lo hayu kotot ad shenivchu shalosh shenatan Yoshua be'eretz Canaan. They would not, this law would not apply. These 3 cities would not grant refuge to those who would run towards them until all 6 were there together. It was one unit. This was a mitzvah which would only apply when there were all 6 cities, both the 3 on inside Eretz Israel proper and the 3 on the other side of the Jordan as well. And if that's the case, then the obvious question is, what Rashi just pointed out and what we see later on in Sefer Dvarim, is why did Moshe Rabbeinu have to set aside 3 of the cities? He was doing something which would have no practical relevance, certainly not in his lifetime, not for many years to come. Why did he have to do that, and what was the point, and why was it necessary? And over here we have a fantastic chidush, a novel idea. The Rambam tells us based on the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot tells us near the beginning of the 4th parak, Ben Azai Omer Havei Ratz LeMitzvah Kala Kev'Chamura. Ben Azai teaches the person should run, a person should be quick, a person should do all they can, make sure with the same amount of zeal and enthusiasm to perform a mitzvah kala, a minor commandment, as a mitzvah chamura, as a major commandment. And what is the difference between a minor versus a major commandment? And over here the Rambam in his commentary to the Mishnah tells us something and uses language which is quite uncharacteristic. I've just brought the first line over here in Hebrew for you, and afterwards we'll just read the translation. But it really is a uncharacteristic phraseology which the Rambam uses. He tells us over here, the sages teach us al chidush nifla b'Torah, about a wonderful innovation in the Torah. Because everything the Torah tells us is a chidush nifla. Everything is wonderful. Everything is an innovation. What is it over here specifically that is such a wonderful innovation? He says, yesh po ziruz al ma'aseh mitzvot. This encouragement towards performing the mitzvot. As we saw, that was what the Mishnah said. Perform a minor mitzvah just like you would a major one. And here brings the Rambam an example. He says, and now I'll just read through the English, and it's stating, in stating that Moshe separated 3 cities in Transjordan, and this is the pasuk from Dvarim. Not what we've seen now. What we saw in our Parasha this week just tells us there need to be 3 cities on the west and 3 on the east. Later on in Sefer Dvarim, it actually tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu separated those 3 cities. He set them aside. And he knew that they would not be effective. That was the Rambam. Moshe Rabbeinu knew he would not enter the land of Israel. He also knew this halacha, that they wouldn't have the status of cities of refuge until the 3 others in the land of Israel would be separated. Nonetheless, he did it anyway. And that's the last line you see over here in the Rambam. He tells us he separated these nonetheless, since he said, so what's the tremendous chiddush over here that the Rambam is teaching us, that Chazal are teaching us, they were learning from Moshe Rabbeinu? Thanks. We can take the source sheet off the screen for the moment. But the chiddush is as follows, and this I heard in the name of Rav Moshe Shapira. That's how. He said that why do we perform mitzvot? What are the things that encourages a person? What is it that motivates a person, that drives him to perform the mitzvot? So there are people that perform mitzvot out of yira, out of fear, that if we do them, we'll get rewarded. If we don't do them, we may get punished. That's one motivation. There's another motivation which is out of ahava, out of love, that a person wants to come close to Hashem, a person wants to do the things that are right. And then there's a third motivation, and that's what Moshe Rabbeinu over here is teaching us. That it's not about fear, that it's not about love, that it's not about reward or not, and it's even irrelevant whether I'm going to be able to finish the mitzvah or not finish the mitzvah. But it's kiyem chayenu v'orech yameinu, that this is what gives us life. This is what gives us the oxygen that we breathe. And this is the analogy, would be that if somebody was walking in the desert and he was dying of thirst, and there was no way that he could be saved, and he was walking along, and he's thirsty, he's completely parched, and he finds a small cup of water. A small cup of water, which even if he drinks it, he won't survive. He won't get out of the desert. It will keep him going for a little bit longer. And we would turn to this person and would say, would you drink or not? Would anybody refuse to drink? Of course you would drink. Of course you would drink the water, because we have a natural instinct within us that we want life, that we're thirsty for water, that we're thirsty for life, and that we'll do whatever it is. Where's it going to end up at the end of the day? Will it lead to reward or not? We'll be able to do it properly and be able to finish, even if not. But a little bit more life, a little bit more water, everyone would take it. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu was doing. When he set aside these 3 cities, it was part of a mitzvah that he could fulfill. It was a way of him, of grabbing onto life. More Torah, more mitzvot. He wouldn't be able to finish it fully. So what? And that's what he's teaching us. And we see from here just how important it is, how to have this feeling, as I said, that Torah is our lifeblood, that to do whatever we can, even if we can't finish, to do our part, to do our best. And many times we find that Hashem will finish it off for us. There's going back to the beginning of Moshe Rabbeinu's life. We find this in another place in the Torah as well. When he was a baby and he was in the daughter of Paro came along, and she saw this baby hiding in the river, and she went out towards him. The Torah tells us, "Vatishlach et amata." She sent out. Difference of opinion how to translate that word, whether it means she sent away her maidservants, or the word amata means she stretched out her hand. And Rashi quotes the Midrash that says that the daughter of Paro stretched out her hand to save this baby from the river. It was very far away. She couldn't reach. But the Midrash says that her hand became elongated and stretched out to save him. A miracle was performed. And whether we understand the Midrash literally or not, the point is it's teaching us the same lesson, that we have to do what we can. We have to put in our effort. We put in our greatest effort. That's all that Hashem expects from us. And many times when we do that, we will find, even if it seemed that the results couldn't come, sometimes the results will come as well. So that's the first lesson that I think we can learn from these Arei Miklat, in terms of we see Moshe Rabbeinu's devotion, his dedication, in terms of setting aside, fulfilling whatever part of the mitzvah that we can, even if we can't complete it. If we can go back to the source sheet now, please. So we'll see some more. I want to go back to the Psukim. So we mentioned 6 cities. And we mentioned the fact that the 6 cities are split up evenly on both sides of the Jordan. I'm reading again in Pasuk Yud Daled. Shalosh ha'arim titnu me'ever le'Yarden. You'll set aside these 3 cities on the east of the Jordan, ve'shlosh ha'arim titnu be'eretz Canaan, and 3 cities on the west. And that sounds all good and proper, and it sounds quite equal, 3 on one side and 3 on the other side. But if we think about it for a moment, where were the majority of Bnei Israel living? They would be living in Eretz Yisrael on the western side. It was only 2.5 tribes, the tribe of Reuven and Gad and half of Menashe, who were on the east. And therefore it seems there actually is a bit of a discrepancy. It should be that there should be more cities on the west. There should be maybe 5 and 1, maybe 4 and 2, whatever it is. But 3 and 3, it seems a little bit disproportionate. It seems that there were too many cities on the east which harbored a much smaller percentage of the population, at least in terms of the tribes. And again, Rashi tells us that this was the case. Based on the Gemara, it says Rashi at Shalosh Ha'alim, Afal Pisha be'Eretz Canaan Tish'a Shvatim, even though in Eretz Canaan, Eretz Yisrael in the west, there were 9 tribes, 9.5. And here on the east of the Jordan, there were only 2.5. Why is it? Hishva minyan alei miklat shelahem, mishum de beGilad, nafishal schim. Gilad is one of the geographical regions that's on the east of the Jordan. And based on a pasuk, which we find later in the Tanakh in Hosea, it tells us that in the land of Gilad, there were more murderers. There was more bloodshed. It was a land that was, as you can see here in the translation, it was covered with footprints of blood. So it tells us Rashi, actually, the reason why we have this numerical discrepancy, the reason why we have on the eastern side of the Jordan just as many cities of refuge for murderers to come as we had on the western side, because there were more, even though there were less people, there were less tribes, but there were more murderers. Were there more murderers? Because this was a place which was further away from the site of the Mikdash. It was further away from the spiritual center, from the educational center of the Jewish people. It was further away from the leadership. And ultimately, tragically, that led later on to a more criminal society. But there's an obvious question that we can ask on this, and this doesn't really seem to answer the question. Remember what we spoke about right at the beginning in the introduction of the shir. The Ir Miklat was a place not for a wanton murderer to go. The Ir Miklat was a place for an inadvertent murderer. And as I said, it's very, very interesting that the Torah calls him a murderer at all. That in itself is a chirush, because we're talking about somebody who did not intend to kill, who it was not premeditated, it was not in cold blood, certainly not at all. But it was some sort of an accident. Somebody was chopping a tree and the axe fell out of his hand. Other examples along those lines. So if that's the case, even if there were more murderers on the eastern side of the Jordan, that's not to say that there were more accidental murders on that side as well. So why would that be the case? So there's a few different answers that are given here. Many of the commentators try and grapple with this question. And I want to look at 2 somewhat technical answers before we get to the third one, which I believe is really really a deep idea from which we can all take something home from. So I've brought you the Ramban. I don't have the translation. It's just in Hebrew. But what he says is that actually there was a bit of trickery going on. There's people that, somebody had gone and killed somebody. They wanted to escape judgment. Maybe they wanted to, to get off free. And therefore they would run away and they would go to these, to these Arei Miklat, to these cities of refuge. Obviously begs the question, why do we need to consider that? Why would the Torah have given refuge for intentional murderers who really, by right, maybe should have deserved the death penalty or something else? But that's the answer the Ramban gives. And along similar lines, but slightly different, the Gemara actually in Masechet Makot tells us that originally, later on it was changed, but you can see over here, the Talmud Bavli, in Makot 10b, Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Yehuda, says initially, either one who killed another unintentionally or one who killed another intentionally would hurry and flee to the cities of refuge. That not without right. This was what the halacha was. Originally, if anybody had killed, they would run, they would go to the city of refuge. And it's from there that the Beit Din would come, the court would send for him, they would expedite him to come along and stand trial. But initially, both the intentional or the unintentional murderers would come and would be in the city of refuge, before those who were intentional would be removed. But there is another way of explaining all of this. Again, our question, the fact that there are intentional murderers on the east side of the Jordan, what does that mean? We need extra cities of refuge for those who killed by accident. And I'd like to share an insight here, which I heard from Rav Nevensal, the Rav of the old city of Yerushalayim, which is a powerful, powerful insight into human nature. And he says, in order to understand it, the first thing we need to do is we need to go back to our previous Parasha, Parashat Matot. We need to understand why it was that we had these tribes living on the eastern side of the Jordan in the first place. Eretz Yisrael is across the Jordan. It's on the west-hand side. That's the land which Moshe Rabbeinu davened and was unable to enter. And we have 2.5 tribes who chose not to enter. And I've brought you just some of the psukim. We won't read the entire thing because it's a very lengthy dialogue between Bnei Reuven and Bnei Gad and Moshe Rabbeinu, and very interesting, a lot of things that we can glean from there. We'll just have a look at one. So the Torah tells us here in Parashat Matot that Miknei Rav haya livnei Reuven velivnei Gad atzum me'od. Both the tribe of Reuven, the tribe of Gad had much cattle. They had very, very great wealth. Vayiru et Eretz Yazer et Eretz Gilad. They saw this land on the east of the Jordan, with the Yazer and Gilad, different geographical regions. V'nei makom makom mikneh. And this land was a land which was very suitable for their cattle, for their flocks, for their possessions. And therefore they came towards Moshe Rabbeinu. V'yavo b'nei Gad u'bnei Reuven, v'yamru Moshe, they asked Moshe Rabbeinu. Ve'el Elazar HaKohen, they came to Elazar, the Kohen Gadol, the son of Aaron. Ve'el Nesiei ha'edah le'mor, and to all the princes of the community. And they asked him as follows. And a few psukim later, we see what their request was. That's okay. V'yomru im matzanu chen beinecha, yutan et ha'aretz hazot lavadecha. They said, if we found favor in your eyes, give us this land. Al tavilenu et hayaden. Let us not cross over the Jordan River. Let us not come into the land of Canaan, into Eretz Yisrael on the west, but let us stay here on the east. And I haven't brought the entire discussion over here, but Moshe Rabbeinu was very, very much taken aback because they are almost incensed at this request. He turns back to the Bnei Gad and the Bnei Reuven and he says to them, can it really be? The entire nation is going to have to come forward. They're going to have to cross. They're going to have to go to war. They're going to have to spend years in conquest fighting for this land. And you're just going to stay where you are. You're not going to go together with them. And as the dialogue goes on, Bnei Reuven and Bnei Gad turn to Moshe Rabbeinu and they say, no, of course we'll come with. That wasn't our intention. We'll come with, we'll contribute. We'll join the army, we'll fight. We'll do whatever needs to be done. We will be together with our brothers. But then we'll come back and we will take our permanent residence, not on the west of the Jordan, but on the east. And ultimately this request is granted. It's accepted. But within the discussion, there's a very, very important exchange that takes place. And there is a nuance of a couple of words where simply the order is changed and we could easily miss it. But Rav Nevenstal points out that this really reveals something to us about what the intention was of Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, what they were thinking, and maybe what they weren't thinking. And you can see over here, Pasuk Tet Zayin tells us, we've got two psukim here. First one is the words of Bnei Gad and Reuven, and one is the answer which Moshe Rabbeinu gives back to them. And they say to him, in amidst this dialogue of we'll come with you, we will fight, but we'll go back and we'll stay where we are. They approached Moshe Rabbeinu and they said to him, Vayomru. Gidrotson nivnele mikneinu po. Valim letapenu. They said, we will build here sheepfolds for our flocks. We will build towns for our children. Again, in the context of we'll build those here, but we'll come and fight with you. And when Moshe Rabbeinu answers them, and ultimately, as I said, he grants this request, but he says, B'nu lachem, he says, when you come back here, B'nu lachem arim letapchem, build cities for your children, u'bdelot letzonachem, and sheepfolds for your flocks. So make sure you do what you do. They've taken an oath that they'll come and fight as well. But you can notice, and I've put the words here both in English and in Hebrew in bold, that when Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven are talking about it, they say, Lemikneinu. First of all, they mention their flocks, and then they mention their children. When Moshe Rabbeinu answers them back, he says, you can do exactly what you've said, with one difference. He first mentions the children, and then he mentions the flocks. Thanks. I think we can we just take the source sheet off the screen? Thank you. And what we see over here from this change of words, Rabbi Joel points out, that we see what the priorities were of Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven. And we see just how skewed their priorities were. And this may have even been something which was subconscious. Right? Consciously, it's very likely. If we had gone and we had asked them at the time, we said, what is more important to you, your children or your cattle? What would they have said? Of course, they would have said their children. Of course, their families are more important than their cattle. But their actions revealed something else. Their actions revealed, and the words which they chose to use subconsciously revealed, that they were putting their possessions before their people. That it was material before the spiritual and before the things which are really should matter. And that, a society that begins like that, a society that's built where possessions are placed before people, has no other course than to become a society where bloodshed will be rampant, ultimately. To become a society where the value of human life is undervalued, is not understood, is not appreciated. And that's what kind of an environment it would create. It says Rabbi Nemetzel, now we can understand why this was a land, akuva midam, why this was a land which was dripped in bloodshed. Because it started off with a very, very subtle misunderstanding, very subtle misalignment of priorities, which over the years developed. But it's more than that. That led to an increase in intentional murders. But that also created an environment where murder was commonplace. It created an environment where the value of human life was not appreciated as it should be. It created an environment where people were desensitized. And therefore, accidental killings would have taken place at a much greater rate as well. And just to give a modern example of where we can see this, if anybody's read Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, he talks about the broken windows theory. And the broken windows theory, and it's been disputed, and not everybody agrees if this is necessarily what caused it or not, but in the 1990s, New York City had a huge crime problem. And there was a new mayor, Rudy Giuliani, and within a very short period of time, the city's fortunes took a 180-degree turn. They changed around completely. And the strategy that he used, what many people think was the thing that caused it to tip, was the thing that changed, well, as I said, the broken windows theory, meaning that he said, we want to crack down on violent crime, but first of all, we're going to crack down on any crime. Graffiti, littering, loitering, broken windows, vandalism, all sorts of things. The police came down with a heavy hand and fast. And what that did was that changed the environment. It created an environment where crime was no longer acceptable, where litter and graffiti and vandalism were no longer acceptable. And ultimately, that led as well to people taking greater steps towards the value of human life, what led to people a much more law-abiding society. And that changed completely. And we see from here the same idea by the Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven. We see the power of an environment. We see the values that we hold and the values we espouse and the values that we live by, that those around us live by, have such an effect on all of us and have such an effect on the way that our society functions. And this is so relevant nowadays, of course, in our current situation. Every little action that we do and every little step that we do publicly to show how important, how much care we are taking in order to protect ourselves, in order to protect others, in order to show the great value of human life and to do all that we can to safeguard that, will certainly have an effect on our environment and certainly have an effect on the way those around us will act. So those are the 2 points that I wanted to share. deep, lasting, eternal messages, I think, from the section of the Arei Miklat, cities of refuge, which is not of such practical relevance nowadays. But as we said, number one, talking about those 6 cities, talking about the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu set aside 3 on the east of the Jordan, even though he couldn't and he would never be able to set aside the 3 on the west. And even though that which he was doing would not have a practical outcome of bringing this mitzvah into effect, nonetheless, he did it because he had a thirst to fulfill whatever he could. He had a thirst to do whatever Torah and mitzvot that he could, and to fulfill that drive, and to teach us to do all we can, even if we can't finish it. But to start, and surely Hashem will help us in many cases to achieve the desired outcome as well. And point number two is that we had those 3 cities on the east. Seemingly there were too many. It should have been that a smaller population would have a smaller amount of cities of refuge. But nonetheless, we saw that because there was an environment which created a lack of sensitivity, which created a lack of value of human life, of the things that really matter, that placed material needs first. We see from that the power of an environment, the power of every act that we can do for ourselves and for each other, and just how much we can uplift our environment and uplift all those around us with everything that we do. Thank you all for listening. It's been wonderful to be with you, and wishing you all Shabbat Shalom.